The hook. The old ranch stood silent under the wide, empty sky. Fields stretched for miles, broken only by fences and the slow sway of tall grass in the wind. The house on the land was small, wooden, and weathered by time. Its owner, a retired man, lived alone. He had no family left, no neighbors close by, and no one to share his meals with. His days were quiet, filled with simple work. Feeding the animals, fixing fences, and sitting on the porch while the sun set. He had chosen this life. After years of service and hardship, he wanted peace. The silence of the ranch gave him comfort, even if it sometimes weighed heavy on his heart. At night, he would sit in his old chair with a cup of coffee, listening to the sound of crickets and the whisper of the wind. It was a lonely life, but it was his. But lately, the nights had felt different. The man could not explain why, but he sensed something watching. The air felt heavy, as if unseen eyes looked down from the sky. Sometimes, he would wake in the middle of the night, certain that a shadow had passed across his window. He would grab his flashlight, step outside, and scan the empty fields. Nothing. Only the sound of the wind moving through the grass. Still, the feeling never left him. One evening, while he sat on the porch, the quiet was broken. Far in the distance, above the horizon, strange lights flickered. At first, he thought they were airplanes or maybe satellites. But no plane moved like that. The lights darted, stopped, and shifted in odd patterns. They glowed with colors too sharp, too bright for any human machine. He leaned forward, his heart beating faster. "What in the world?" he muttered. The lights grew brighter, closer. Then, just as suddenly, they vanished. The sky returned to its calm darkness, stars twinkling as if nothing had happened. The rancher sat still for a long time, his hand gripping the arm of his chair. Finally, he shook his head and whispered, "Getting old, seeing things." But deep down, he knew it wasn't his imagination. That night, he struggled to sleep. The strange lights haunted his mind. He dreamed of voices calling his name, though no one was there. He dreamed of footsteps across his porch, though the boards were still. When morning came, he told himself it was only bad dreams. Yet, the unease stayed with him. Days passed. He returned to his routine, mending fences, caring for the animals, cooking simple meals. But the ranch no longer felt the same. He noticed how the horses grew restless at night, stamping their hooves and snorting nervously. The dogs barked at empty fields, their eyes fixed on something he couldn't see. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was waiting. Then, one night, the waiting ended. The rancher was sitting by his fire, sipping coffee, when he heard it. Soft, strange voices carried on the wind. His name, whispered, clear. He froze, the cup trembling in his hand. Slowly, he set it down, grabbed his old lantern, and stepped outside. The night was cold. Stars shone bright overhead, but the air was thick with unease. His boots crunched on the dirt as he walked to the porch rail, listening. Again the voices, louder this time, calling, pleading. He raised the lantern high, scanning the fields. At first there was nothing, just grass and shadows. But then he saw movement. Figures, faint in the distance, walking toward him. His chest tightened. No neighbors lived within miles. Who could be out here in the dead of night? As the figures came closer, he realized they were not men. Their shapes were taller, thinner, their movements strange. The lantern light caught their faces, and he gasped. They were not human. Their eyes glowed faintly. Their skin shone with colors that seemed to shift under the light. Each wore long cloaks that fluttered in the wind, torn and dirt-stained. And their faces, he could see sorrow etched deep in their features. 11 of them. 11 alien women, walking slowly, as if every step carried a lifetime of grief. The rancher's hand shook as he held the lantern. His voice cracked when he spoke. What do you want?" The tallest among them stepped forward. Her voice was soft, trembling, but clear. "We seek shelter. Please. We have nowhere else to go." The rancher's heart pounded. His quiet life, his safe ranch, was no longer his alone. 11 alien widows stood before him, their eyes full of desperation. And in that moment, as the night wrapped around them, he knew his life was about to change forever. Arrival of the widows. The old man's hand still shook as he held the lantern. The light flickered against the night, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. 11 figures stood before him, alien yet not monstrous. Their faces carried the same weight he had seen in humans who had lost everything. Grief, desperation, the kind of sorrow that made even the strongest bend under its weight. The rancher's first instinct was to slam the door and lock it. This was his land, his home, and he had chosen this life of quiet to avoid strangers. But as he looked into their eyes, those strange, luminous eyes, he hesitated. Something inside him whispered that they were not here to harm him. They were here because they had no choice. The tallest of the women stepped closer. Her cloak was torn, revealing skin that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her voice was soft but carried a strength that made him listen. "We are widows," she said. "Our husbands are gone. Our home is gone. We have nowhere left to turn. Please, human, give us shelter." The rancher swallowed hard. His voice came rough, unused to speaking with anyone for so long. "Why me? Why here? You must know, I'm just an old man. I can't give you much." The woman lowered her head. "Because you are human." The answer chilled him. He did not understand it, not yet. But there was no mistaking the truth in her voice. The others stood behind her, silent, their cloaks clutched tight as if to hide their brokenness. He could see exhaustion in their every movement. They looked as though they had walked for miles, maybe days, across rough land with no food and no rest. The rancher turned his eyes to the dark horizon, then back at them. His heart battled with his mind. His mind told him to send them away, to protect himself, to avoid the trouble they surely carried with them. But his heart could not ignore the plea in their voices. He finally stepped aside, motioning toward the house and the barn beyond. "You can stay in the barn. It's not much, but it's dry. You'll find hay, water, and warmth." The relief that spread across their faces was so sudden, so raw, that it struck him silent. Some of them bowed their heads, others whispered words in a language he could not understand. The tall woman gave a small nod. "You have given us more than we hoped for. Thank you." They moved carefully toward the barn, their steps slow as if every movement still carried fear. The rancher followed at a distance, his lantern lighting the way. He watched as they entered, some leaning on one another for support, others sinking down against the walls in exhaustion. For a long time he stood outside, staring at the barn door. Questions swirled in his head. Who were they really? What had they lost? And why would a group of alien widows come to the door of an old human rancher? Later, he returned to his small house, but sleep did not come. His mind replayed the moment he saw them for the first time, the way their eyes had glowed faintly in the dark, the way their voices carried sorrow and strength. He could still hear the woman's words echoing in his head. "Because you are human." The next morning, as the sun rose over the fields, the rancher walked to the barn with cautious steps. He expected to find the widows gone, vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. But when he opened the doors, he found them still there. Some were sitting on bales of hay, their cloaks pulled around them. Others had fallen asleep on the ground, too tired to care about comfort. They looked out of place, alien in every sense of the word, yet strangely vulnerable, like refugees seeking a safe haven. One of them, younger than the rest, looked up at him with wide eyes. She whispered something in her own language, then offered a small, hesitant smile. It was the first sign of warmth he had seen from them. The rancher cleared his throat. "I've got water by the well, and food in the house. Not much, but enough." The tall widow from the night before stepped forward. "We will not take more than you can give. We only ask for a little time, a little safety." He nodded slowly. "You'll have it. For now." Over the next hours, the widows settled into the barn. They drank from the well, shared what little food he brought them, and rested in silence. They spoke rarely, and when they did, their words carried weight, as if every sentence carried memories they wished they could forget. The rancher, though still wary, began to notice small things. The way they helped one another with care. The way they never raised their voices, never argued. The way their eyes always scanned the horizon, as if they feared something might appear at any moment. Something had driven them here. Something still haunted them. That night, when the rancher lay in his bed, he could not shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far larger than himself. He was only one man, living on a quiet ranch, far from the troubles of the galaxy. And yet, 11 alien widows had chosen his door. The last thought that came to him before sleep was a question that refused to leave his mind. Life on the ranch changes. The days that followed were unlike anything the old rancher had ever known. For years, his life had been measured by the rising and setting of the sun, by the simple rhythm of work and rest. But now, with 11 alien widows living in his barn, everything felt different. At first, the rancher thought they would stay hidden, quiet, and distant. He imagined they would sleep most of the time, eat what he offered, and avoid his presence. But little by little, he noticed how they began to step into his world. On the second morning, he walked outside to tend to the animals and found 2 of the widows already there. They were standing by the corral watching the horses. Their strange eyes glowed faintly in the early light, and their cloaks brushed against the dusty ground. When the rancher approached, they turned to him, and one of them spoke in halting English. "Strong creatures," she said, nodding toward the horses. Her voice carried a note of wonder. "They listen to you?" The rancher gave a small shrug. "They know me. Been raising horses all my life." The widow tilted her head, studying him as if trying to understand not just his words, but his place in the world. Then, without another word, she reached out her hand toward the nearest horse. The animal snorted, pulling back at first, but the woman remained still. Slowly, the horse leaned forward, pressing its muzzle against her palm. Her eyes widened, and for the first time she smiled. It was a small moment, but it struck the rancher deeply. By the third day, the widows had begun to help without being asked. One gathered firewood from the edge of the property. Another carried buckets of water from the well. A few of them worked together to patch the broken door of the barn, their long fingers moving with surprising skill as they tied boards and hammered nails. The rancher watched them with cautious respect. He was not used to having anyone around, let alone strangers from another world. Yet, there was something about the way they moved, the way they worked together silently, that reminded him of people he had once known long ago. Neighbors, family, a community he had lost. Still, the strangeness never faded. He noticed that they spoke to one another in whispers, their language a mix of sounds and tones he could not follow. At night, when the rancher sat on his porch, he would hear their voices drifting from the barn. Sometimes the words were sharp, urgent, almost fearful. Other times, they were soft, carrying a weight of sadness that made his chest tighten. He wanted to ask them questions. Where did they come from? Why had they lost their husbands? Why did they seek him, a lonely old man, when they could have gone anywhere else? But each time he tried, their eyes would cloud with sorrow, and they would change the subject. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, the rancher carried a pot of stew to the barn. The widows had eaten little since they arrived, careful not to take more than he offered. This time, however, when he set the pot down, they all gathered quickly, their hunger plain. As they ate, the youngest widow looked up at him. Her English was broken, but her words were clear enough. "You live here, all alone?" she asked. The rancher nodded. "Been that way for years now." "Why?" she pressed, her glowing eyes searching his face. The rancher paused. It was not a question he often thought about. He looked down at his weathered hands, then back at her. "Because it's easier," he said quietly. People bring trouble. Out here, I only answer to myself." The barn fell silent for a moment. Then the tall widow, the one who had first spoken at his door, said softly, "Even when you have no one left, you still choose to protect others. That is why we came." The words unsettled him. He wanted to ask what she meant, but her tone made it clear that this was not the time. Over the next week, the widow's presence became part of the ranch's daily rhythm. They learned to gather eggs, to milk the goats, even to fix a broken fence with steady hands. The rancher found himself speaking more than he had in years, explaining how to use tools, how to care for animals, how to work the land. And though their ways were different, they listened carefully, eager to learn. But the mystery around them only grew deeper. One night, long after he had gone to bed, the rancher awoke to faint sounds outside his window. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his lantern, and stepped into the dark. The barn glowed faintly from within, as if lit by more than lantern light. He crept closer and peeked through the crack in the door. Inside, the widows were gathered in a circle, their cloaks spread wide, their hands raised. Strange symbols glowed faintly across the dirt floor, patterns that pulsed with soft light. They were chanting in their own language, their voices weaving together in a low, haunting harmony. The rancher felt a shiver run down his spine. Whatever they were doing, it was not of this world. Before he could step back, the tall widow turned her head sharply. Her glowing eyes met his through the crack in the door. The chanting stopped. Silence fell heavy in the barn. For a long moment no one moved. Then the tall widow spoke, her voice calm but filled with something unspoken. "You should not watch, human." The rancher clenched the lantern tight, his jaw hard. "What are you hiding from me?" The woman lowered her hand, the faint light fading from the ground. "Not hiding, protecting. You gave us shelter. We will not bring harm to you." The rancher's voice came rough. "Then tell me what it is you're running from." But the widow only looked at him with those sorrowful eyes and said, "Soon, you will see." He walked back to his house, unsettled, his heart pounding. The widows had brought change to his ranch, yes, but they had also brought secrets. Secrets that would not stay hidden forever. And as the stars burned cold and silent above, the rancher realized that his simple, lonely life had been pulled into a story much larger than he had ever imagined. The hidden past. The rancher could not shake what he had seen in the barn that night. The glowing symbols, the chanting, the strange power in their voices. It lingered in his mind like a shadow. He told himself he would get answers. He had given them shelter, food, and trust. They owed him the truth. But the next morning, when he went to the barn, the widows acted as if nothing had happened. They worked in silence, carrying water, tending animals, and repairing tools. Their faces were calm, but their eyes always seemed to carry something unspoken. For several days, the rancher stayed quiet. He watched. He listened. He tried to catch whispers of their language, to piece together their secrets. But it was useless. Their words meant nothing to his ears. And still, the memory of that glowing circle burned inside him. One evening, as the sky turned red with the setting sun, the rancher walked to the barn. He found the widows gathered together, sitting in silence after their meal. They looked tired, their cloaks worn, their faces drawn. He cleared his throat, his voice rough but steady. "I've been patient," he said, "but I need to know. Who are you? What are you running from?" The widows shifted uncomfortably. Most lowered their eyes. But one of them, a woman smaller than the rest, slowly raised her head. Her voice was quiet, but each word carried the weight of truth. "Our husbands are dead," she said. "All of them." The barn grew still. Even the animals seemed to fall silent. The rancher's chest tightened. He had guessed as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made the air feel heavier. The tall widow, the leader, placed her hand on the smaller woman's shoulder. Then she looked at the rancher, her glowing eyes locked on his. "They were killed in the war against humans." The rancher froze. For a moment, he wondered if he had misheard. His breath caught, and he gripped the wooden post beside him. "Humans?" he said, his voice low. "You mean, my people killed them?" The tall widow gave a slow nod. Her voice was steady, but her words were sharp as knives. "Yes, our husbands fought against your kind, and they never returned." The rancher's stomach turned. He had known of wars beyond Earth, rumors of battles fought among the stars. He had heard whispers long ago, when he was still in service, before he chose this quiet life. But those were distant things, far away from his ranch, far away from his simple world. And now, here stood 11 widows, living proof of that war. He took a long breath. If humans killed them, why come to me? Why not run from us? The widow's eyes softened, though her voice trembled. Because even in war, we saw something in humans. A fire, a strength. Your kind fights, yes, but also protects. You defend those who cannot defend themselves. Even your enemies spoke of it. And when we were left with nothing, we knew there was only one chance left. To find a human who would show mercy. The rancher turned away, pacing slowly across the barn. His boots scraped against the floor. His mind was a storm. These widows were the wives of soldiers who had fought against his people. Enemies. And yet, here they were, asking for shelter, trusting him more than their own kind. He stopped, his back to them. His voice was rough. So that's it? You came to me because you thought I'd protect you? Yes, the tall widow said. Because you are human, and humans protect. The rancher clenched his fists. Part of him wanted to shout, to demand they leave, to push the burden off his shoulders. But another part, the part he couldn't ignore, remembered the desperation in their eyes when they arrived. Remembered the way they worked silently, never asking for more than he gave. Remembered the way the young widow had smiled at the horses, fragile yet genuine. He turned back to them. His voice was quieter now. And what are you protecting yourselves from? The tall widow's face darkened. She glanced at the others, then leaned closer. Her words came low, heavy with fear. Not all our kind wanted the war, but those who did, they still hunt us. They call us traitors for seeking shelter with a human. They will not forgive. They will not stop. The rancher's chest tightened. He looked toward the horizon, the fields stretching endlessly under the fading light. For years, his ranch had been his safe haven. Now he realized it might soon become a battlefield. One of the younger widows suddenly spoke, her voice breaking. They will come. They always come. The barn filled with silence again, broken only by the faint rustle of hay. The rancher felt the weight of their eyes on him. They were not just refugees. They were targets. And by letting them stay, he had painted a mark on his own land. But as he looked at them, huddled together in their cloaks, he felt something stir inside him. They had lost everything. Their homes, their families, their safety. And still, they had chosen to trust him. The rancher straightened his back. His voice was calm, but firm. As long as you're under my roof, no one harms you. Do you understand? This is my land, and I'll defend it. The widows exchanged glances, their glowing eyes shimmering in the dim light. Slowly, the tall widow nodded. Then you are more human than most we have known. The rancher said nothing more. He left the barn, walking back toward his small house under the starlit sky. His steps were heavy, but his mind was clear. For the first time in years, he felt purpose again. But deep in his chest, he knew the peace would not last. The widow's enemies were coming. And when they arrived, his quiet ranch would never be the same. The threat returns. The days after the widow's confession passed like heavy clouds before a storm. The rancher went about his work as always. Mending fences, checking the wells, feeding the animals, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every creak of the windmill, every howl of the night wind, every sudden noise in the fields made him pause and listen harder than before. The widows helped more now, as if trying to repay his kindness. They gathered wood, hauled water, and even learned to cook with his simple pots and pans. Sometimes, when he stood back and watched, it almost felt like life had taken on a new rhythm. The barn that had once stood empty was now alive with quiet voices and careful laughter. The house, once silent, now held light even after dark. But beneath that fragile peace was fear. The rancher saw it in the way the widows scanned the sky each morning, their glowing eyes sharp and restless. He heard it in their whispers at night, when they spoke in their own language, voices low and trembling. And he felt it himself, deep in his chest, every time he remembered their warning. They will come. It was on the 6th night that the signs appeared. The rancher was on the porch, sipping his coffee, when he saw a faint glow on the horizon. At first, he thought it was just the rising moon. But the light moved, slow, steady, and far too controlled to be natural. It hovered, then darted sideways, vanishing behind the dark line of hills. His stomach sank. He had seen strange lights before, but never this close. The dogs in the yard began to bark wildly, their hackles raised. The horses stamped in their corral, snorting and pacing in agitation. Even the air itself seemed charged, as if the land was holding its breath. The widows came out of the barn, cloaks pulled tight. Their eyes glowed brighter than usual, reflecting both fear and anger. The tall widow stepped forward, her voice low and grim. "They have found us." The rancher set his coffee down, his jaw tightening. "You're sure?" She nodded. "We know their ships. We know their light." The rancher looked back at the horizon. He had fought his share of battles in the past, though not like this, not against enemies from the stars. But the old fire inside him, the one he thought had gone out long ago, sparked to life again. He turned to the widows. "If they're coming, then we don't have much time." That night, the rancher worked as he had not worked in years. He dug through his storage shed, pulling out old tools, scraps of wood, lengths of wire. The widows watched in silence, then began to join him. Together they built barricades at the edges of the property, stacking hay bales and wooden planks into makeshift walls. The widows' hands were quick, skilled. They knew how to tie knots, how to weave materials together into stronger shapes. One of them used strange powder from a pouch at her side, sprinkling it across the fences until they glowed faintly blue. "It will hold them for a little time," she explained. The rancher nodded. He didn't understand it, but he trusted it. By dawn, the ranch looked different. The peaceful fields were now a place of quiet defense. The barn doors were reinforced. The house windows were barred. Even the animals had been moved to a safer corral, hidden behind the grove of trees. The widows gathered in a circle, their cloaks wrapped tight, their voices low as they chanted words in their strange tongue. The rancher listened from a distance. He did not know what they said, but he could feel it, the weight of their fear, the strength of their will. When the chanting stopped, the tall widow approached him. "They will not wait long. They will come in the night. And when they do, they will not stop until we are taken." The rancher's eyes narrowed. "Not while I'm standing." For a moment, the tall widow studied him, her glowing eyes unreadable. Then she gave a slow nod. "You are human indeed." The day passed in uneasy silence. The widows worked side by side with the rancher, carrying water, sharpening tools, and checking the makeshift defenses. But as the sun fell and darkness spread across the land, the tension grew heavier. The rancher lit his lanterns, setting them along the porch and fence line. The widows stood together near the barn, cloaks pulled close, eyes fixed on the horizon. Even the animals were restless, shifting and pacing in their pens. And then it came. At first, only a low hum filled the air, so soft it could almost be mistaken for wind. But it grew louder, deeper, until the very ground seemed to vibrate. The widows stiffened. The rancher gripped his lantern tighter. From beyond the hills, the glow returned, brighter this time, sharper. Then, with a sudden flash, the sky lit up with the outline of ships. They were sleek, black against the stars, their lights pulsing like the eyes of predators. The widows gasped softly, their voices trembling as they whispered in their own tongue. The rancher didn't need translation. He knew what he was seeing, hunters. One of the younger widows turned to him, her voice breaking. "They will kill you. They will kill us all." The rancher set his lantern down on the porch rail. His voice was calm, steady, but filled with iron. "Not if we fight." The widows looked at him with wide eyes, some with fear, some with disbelief. But slowly, one by one, they nodded. The tall widow stepped forward. "Then we will fight with you." The hum of the ships grew louder, filling the night air like a storm. The rancher's land, his quiet home of solitude, had become the stage for something far greater than he had ever imagined. And as he stood at the edge of his porch, Watching the shadows of the ships move closer, the old fire burned brighter within him. He was not just a lonely man anymore. He was a defender, a shield, a human standing against the dark. The widows gathered behind him, their glowing eyes fierce. Together they waited. The storm was coming. Humanity's choice. The night sky trembled with the sound of engines. The hunters' ships hovered above the hills, their lights cutting sharp beams across the fields. The hum was no longer soft. It was a roar that shook the ground, a predator's growl before the strike. The rancher stood on his porch, his shoulders square, his lantern flickering by his side. The widows gathered behind him, cloaks wrapped tight, their glowing eyes filled with fear but also something new, hope. For the first time since their arrival, they were not running. They were standing. The rancher took a deep breath. He had not been a soldier for years, but the instincts were still there, buried under quiet days and lonely nights. He looked at the barn, the fences, the trees, and he saw not just land. He saw cover, choke points, and traps. A battlefield waiting to be claimed. He turned to the widows. They'll come fast, and they'll come hard. But they don't know this land. I do. And as long as I breathe, no one takes you from here. The tall widow stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. Then we fight together. The rancher gave a sharp nod. Then we fight together. The first strike. The ground shook as one of the ships descended, hovering low over the far fence line. A beam of white light cut through the darkness, scanning across the fields. The horses cried out, kicking against their corral. The dogs barked furiously, their voices echoing into the night. The widows huddled, their cloaks glowing faintly as strange patterns lit up along the fabric. They began to chant in low, haunting voices, the same ritual the rancher had once spied on. But this time he did not interrupt. He let them call whatever strength they could. The rancher moved quickly. He grabbed his old rifle from the porch, checked the barrel, and spat into the dirt. The weapon was old, outdated, but in his hands it felt alive again. He had no illusions about matching alien firepower with bullets, but sometimes it wasn't the weapon, it was the man behind it. When the first beam of light swept near the house, the rancher aimed and fired. The shot cracked like thunder across the fields. The bullet struck the ship's spotlight, shattering it in a burst of sparks. The sudden darkness startled the hunters, and the ship pulled back, its engines whining in frustration. The widows gasped, then cheered softly. The rancher reloaded. "That's right," he muttered. "Not so easy now, is it?" The defense of the ranch. The hunters came harder after that. Figures dropped from the ships, tall and armored, their movements sharp and predatory. They carried strange weapons that hummed with energy, glowing in the night. The rancher motioned to the widows. "Stay low. Stay behind cover." But the widows did not hide. They spread out, their hands glowing as they traced symbols in the dirt. Barriers of blue light shimmered into existence, like walls of glass standing between the hunters and the barn. When the hunters fired, the barriers flared but held, their strange magic absorbing the blasts. The rancher used the chaos to his advantage. He moved between cover, firing from the shadows using the land he knew so well. He aimed not at the hunters themselves but at the ground around them, kicking up dust and forcing them into positions where the widows' barriers were strongest. The hunters snarled in frustration, their movements quick and brutal. But they were not prepared for human stubbornness or human strategy. At one point, 2 hunters broke through the barrier, charging toward the barn. The widows screamed, but before the attackers could reach them, the rancher stepped out from behind a fence post. He swung a heavy iron tool, an old rancher's shovel, catching one of the hunters across the head. The alien staggered, surprised by the raw force. The second lunged at him, but the rancher ducked, drove his shoulder forward, and shoved the creature back into the widow's glowing wall. The energy flared, throwing the hunter to the ground. The widows stared in shock. The old man stood breathing hard, his rifle in one hand, the broken shovel in the other. He looked at them, eyes blazing. "This is my land," he growled, "and no one takes it from me." Humanity's choice. The battle raged across the ranch. The hunters pressed harder, their ships circling like wolves around prey. But each time they struck, the rancher and the widows held. The widows sang louder now, their voices carrying across the night. The air shimmered with their strange energy, their glowing barriers growing stronger. But even they knew their power had limits. Already, their cloaks frayed, their hands trembled from the effort. The rancher saw it. He knew they could not hold forever, and so he made his choice. He ran toward the house, climbed the porch steps, and pulled out something he had kept hidden for years. An old human signal flare, a relic from his service days. He lit it and fired into the sky. A red streak tore upward, bursting into light above the ranch. The hunters froze, their ships hesitating. They knew what it meant. Somewhere out there, humans would see that flare. Soldiers, watchers, maybe even patrols. Help could come. The rancher looked back at the widows. His face was hard, but his voice was steady. I told you, as long as you're under my roof, you're safe. They'll have to kill me before they touch you. The tall widow's eyes shone with tears. You would risk everything for us? The rancher gave a short nod. That's what it means to be human. The turning point. The hunters grew desperate. Their ships lowered, preparing for one final assault. The widows' voices rose in a thunderous chant, their barriers glowing bright enough to light the entire ranch. And the rancher, tired, old, but unbroken, stood at the center of it all, rifle in hand, shovel at his side, fire in his eyes. He had lived alone for years, seeking only peace. But when the moment came, when the choice had to be made, he did not choose silence. He chose humanity. He chose to fight. The hunters charged one last time. The widows raised their hands. The rancher stepped forward. And the ranch, once quiet and forgotten, became the place where humanity showed its strength once more. Resolution and legacy. The night roared with fire and light. The hunters charged one last time, their weapons blazing, their ships circling like predators around prey. The air shook with their fury, the ground burned where their shots struck. But the widows did not falter. Their voices rose together in a single, thunderous chant, their glowing cloaks shining brighter than the moon itself. The barriers they raised flared with power, shielding the barn and the house in walls of light. Every word they spoke was heavy with loss, but also with strength. They had been broken once before. They would not be broken again. At the center of it all stood the rancher. His rifle cracked again and again, echoing into the night. His aim was steady, his stance unyielding, his old body fueled by something deeper than strength, by purpose. For years he had lived alone, waiting for nothing. But now, with 11 lives behind him, he had something worth fighting for. When one hunter broke through the barrier, lunging toward the widows, the rancher was there. He swung his broken shovel like an axe, driving the alien back into the dirt. When another tried to circle around the corral, he fired a shot that shattered its weapon. Each move was rough, simple, and human, but that was enough. The widow's magic and the rancher's grit became one defense. Still, the battle could not last forever. The widows' voices trembled with exhaustion, their glowing hands shaking. The barriers flickered, cracks of darkness slipping through. The hunters pressed harder, sensing the weakness. The rancher looked to the sky, where his flare still burned faintly, a streak of red light against the stars. Would anyone see it? Would anyone come? Or would this be the place where he and the widows fell together? He clenched his jaw. If this was the end, he would make it one they remembered. He stepped forward, out from behind the barriers, standing in open ground. The hunters paused, their weapons raised. He raised his voice, rough and powerful, carrying across the fields. You want them? He shouted. You'll have to go through me first. For a heartbeat, silence fell. The hunters hesitated. And in that silence, the widow's chant rose again, louder, stronger, fueled by his defiance. The barriers flared back to life. The hunters charged. And then the sky answered. The arrival. A new sound tore through the night. Deep, thunderous engines, different from the hunters. From beyond the clouds, bright lights streaked downward, cutting through the darkness. Ships, human ships. The flare had been seen. The hunters looked up, their movements faltering. They knew that sound. They knew that fire. A human patrol ship roared overhead, its cannons firing bursts of blazing light. The ground shook as explosions lit up the fields, forcing the hunters back. More ships followed, descending fast, their weapons sharp and precise. The widows gasped, their glowing eyes wide. For the first time in years, they saw hope not just in whispers but in fire. The rancher lowered his rifle slowly, watching as the hunters scrambled. Some ran for their ships. Others fired wildly, but their blasts were drowned out by the power of the human patrol. Within minutes, the hunters were retreating, their sleek black ships rising back into the sky, fleeing into the stars from where they had come. The ranch fell silent again. The smoke cleared. The widows lowered their hands, their cloaks dimming as their chant faded into quiet sobs of relief. The rancher stood still, his chest heaving, his rifle heavy in his hands. He had faced the storm and survived. The aftermath. Human soldiers landed soon after, stepping out of their ships in armored suits. They scanned the field, checking the damage, their weapons still raised in caution. When they saw the widows, they hesitated, their voices sharp with suspicion. "Aliens," one soldier muttered. "What are they doing here?" The rancher stepped forward, standing tall despite his tired frame. His voice cut through the smoke and silence. "They're under my protection." The soldiers exchanged glances. One of them frowned. "Sir, they're kind. I don't care what war they fought," the rancher snapped. "They came to me for shelter, and I gave it. They're widows. They've lost everything. They don't need more enemies. They need a home." The soldiers looked at one another. Finally, their leader nodded. "Then they'll have it. If they're under your word, they're under ours." The widows bowed their heads, tears glimmering in their glowing eyes. For the first time since they had arrived at his door, they felt truly safe. Legacy of the ranch. In the weeks that followed, the ranch slowly healed. The fences were rebuilt, the barns repaired, the land cleared of battle scars. The widows stayed, helping the rancher not just out of duty, but out of gratitude. They worked the land, cared for the animals, and turned the once empty ranch into a place alive with voices, laughter, and light. The rancher no longer ate alone. At night, when he sat on the porch, the widows would join him, their strange glowing eyes turned toward the stars. Sometimes they spoke of their lost home, of the war, of the pain they carried. Other times they said nothing at all, sitting in quiet companionship. The ranch was no longer silent, and the rancher was no longer alone. Word of what had happened spread, whispered among soldiers, travelers, and even other worlds. They spoke of the old human rancher who stood against hunters with nothing but a rifle, a shovel, and the courage to protect 11 alien widows. They spoke of a man who had nothing left, but still chose to give everything. Final reflection. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold, the tall widow turned to the rancher. Her voice was soft, but filled with meaning. "You saved us, not because of who we are, but because of who you are. That is humanity." The rancher looked out across his fields, where the widows worked side by side, laughter carrying in the warm air. For the first time in years, his heart felt full. He gave a small smile, his voice low. "Maybe. Or maybe I just got tired of being alone." The widow shook her head. "No, you are more than that. You are human. And that is enough." As the stars rose above, the rancher leaned back in his chair, the sound of life around him. His ranch was no longer just his. It was theirs. A place of loss, turned into a place of hope. And somewhere out in the galaxy, hunters would remember the night they came for widows, and were driven back by one stubborn, retired human rancher.